At the dawn of the 20th century, there were still places on Earth that defied human reach, realms so hostile and remote that they seemed to belong not to civilization but to myth. At the top and bottom of the world lie the polar regions, endless white deserts scoured by wind, crushed by cold and indifferent to human ambition. To enter them was to wager everything, body, mind and life itself. The race to the South Pole was not simply a contest of distance. It was a trial of intelligence, preparation and will. It demanded more than courage. It demanded mastery. Among the men who dared to challenge the last great unknown, one figure stood apart. Roald Amundsen was not the loudest nor the most celebrated at the outset, but he was the most deliberate, the most adaptable, and ultimately the most successful. Amundsen, conqueror of the White Abyss, the man who claimed the South Pole, is the story of how preparation became destiny. It follows Amundsen's transformation from a student of polar hardship into the architect of one of the most astonishing achievements in human history. He did not charge blindly into the unknown. He studied it, respected it, and reshaped himself to survive it. This is not merely a tale of flags planted and miles conquered. It is the story of decisions made long before the first step onto the ice, of nutrition calculated to the ounce, routes mapped with ruthless precision, dogs chosen over pride, and patience wielded as a strategic weapon. It is a study in leadership, under extremes where discipline meant survival, and a single misjudgment could mean death. Set against Amundsen's methodical ascent is the shadow of rivalry. The world watched as his approach collided with that of Robert Falcon Scott, embodiment of British tradition and honor. Their parallel journeys, driven by different philosophies, cultures, and assumptions, would lead to vastly different ends, illuminating both triumph and tragedy frozen into Antarctic history. Chapter by chapter, this book peels back the layers of the polar conquest, the secret decisions that rerouted fate, the construction of the perfect polar plan, the long waits in darkness at Framheim, and the final, silent march across the Antarctic plateau. Through false starts, near-fatal errors, and moments of sublime clarity, we encounter not just the explorer but the mindset that allowed him to endure. Where others could not. As you step into this story, you walk beside Amundsen across the most unforgiving landscape on Earth. You feel the cold, the tension, and the weight of history pressing forward with every stride. This is more than the making of a legend. It is an invitation to witness how resolve, intelligence, and preparation carried one man to the bottom of the world and into immortality. Chapter 1: A Boy Who Dreamed of Ice. Early life in Norway. Roald Amundsen's earliest years unfolded amidst the tranquil, yet formidable landscapes of rural Norway. Born in 1872 in Purges, Østfold, his childhood was shaped by the ceaseless interplay between human life and the ever-present cold. The Norwegian winter was both a challenge and a tutor, instilling in young Roald a deep affinity for the icy environment that would one day become his stage and adversary. Amundsen's family was rooted in the tradition of maritime endeavors. His father, Jens Amundsen, was a ship owner, an occupation demanding resilience, calculation, and an intimate knowledge of the elements. From a tender age, Roald absorbed the tales of seafaring and survival, stories that unfurled in the flickering light of evening fires and set his imagination ablaze. These narratives kindled in the boy an inexorable yearning for adventure that was both a rite of passage and a calling. The home itself was austere yet nurturing. Roald grew accustomed to the rhythms of rural life, the work demanded for self-sufficiency, in a climate where nature had to be respected and sometimes feared. Winters were cruel, imposing upon farm life an exacting regimen in which every task from chopping firewood to mending here was a lesson in preparation and endurance. His mother, Gustava Solquist, presided with a firm hand, fostering discipline and self-reliance, qualities that would become the lattice work of Roald's personality. Significantly, the influence of Norway's traditions of outdoor recreation and exploration, the ethos of friluftsliv, the love of life outdoors, was ingrained from childhood. Roald joined his brothers in skiing across snowy fields, ice skating on frozen lakes, and hiking fog-shrouded hills, each excursion became an informal apprenticeship, an initiation into the ways of traversing and thriving in cold and difficult conditions. Education, both formal and informal, played a vital role. Roald attended local schools, where he demonstrated a sharp intellect coupled with an uncommonly fierce determination. He excelled in science and geography, finding inspiration in accounts of Arctic explorers, especially the celebrated Fridtjof Nansen. The library became his refuge. The books lining its shelves were portals to worlds of icebergs, polar bears, and men risking all for discovery. As he matured, the dream of emulating these legendary figures crystallized into a lifelong quest. While his parents envisioned for him a career in medicine, a stable, respectable path, Roald's heart was set on exploration. Nonetheless, he obeyed his mother's wishes and enrolled in medical school upon her death. Yet, even during these years, his attention wavered. The lure of the unknown was more compelling than anatomical diagrams and clinical procedures. The passing of his mother provided both a profound personal loss and the liberation to pursue his destiny. It is in these formative experiences, austere winters, maritime tales, the discipline of labor and study, the inspiration of outdoor exploits that the seeds of Amundsen's resilience and ambition were sown. He emerged not just as a boy of Norway, but as a product of its windswept fields and stormy coast, where dreaming of ice was both a metaphor for longing and an invitation to destiny. The journey toward the South Pole, then, begins not in blizzards and snowfields, but in the quiet discipline and quiet daring of a Norwegian childhood. Amundsen's later triumphs were foreshadowed by this early landscape, where each cold dawn carried the promise of adventure. In his solitary moments, gazing across the snowbound fields, Roald knew that his life's trajectory was pointed northward and ultimately southward, toward the unclaimed territories that would test and define his character. The story of the boy who dreamed of ice is, above all, the story of a soul restless for the horizon, seeking the vanishing point where Earth meets endless winter sky. Chapter 2, Born for the Cold, Youth, Discipline and Determination. Roald Amundsen's adolescence was a crucible refining the passions and ambitions kindled in childhood. In the harsh Norwegian climate, he honed not only his body but his mind, forging the discipline that would serve as the bedrock of his future exploits. The landscapes that surrounded him, rugged fjords, dense forests, and frozen lakes, demanded resilience, methodical preparation, and an acceptance of hardship as a daily companion. From an early age, Amundsen exhibited an almost ascetic commitment to self-improvement. He undertook strenuous physical routines, skiing long distances, swimming in frigid waters, and running across uneven terrain. These exercises, though arduous, were not mere pastimes. They were integral to his philosophy of readiness. Amundsen believed deeply that a body attuned to adversity could better withstand the unpredictable challenges of polar exploration. His routines were complemented by an insatiable curiosity and a voracious appetite for learning. He devoured literature on Arctic and Antarctic expeditions, absorbing the nuances of survival, navigation, and resourcefulness employed by earlier explorers. The accounts of S.A. Undry, John Franklin, and especially Fridtjof Nansen provided both instruction and inspiration. Amundsen found himself captivated by the tales of human endurance, engineering improvisations, and a delicate balance between ambition and caution. Discipline extended beyond the physical, permeating every aspect of Roald's character. He adhered to strict schedules, kept meticulous records of personal progress, and set goals with unwavering determination. His time at medical school, although never completed, reinforced his appreciation for planning, accuracy, and detailed observation, qualities worth their weight in the perilous conditions of the polar regions. Amundsen also developed a keen interest in the science behind survival. He experimented with clothing, food preservation, and shelter construction, seeking innovations that would confer an edge in the lethal cold. The lessons he gleaned were often grounded in observation of traditional practices among indigenous peoples, whose centuries of adaptation offered treasures of pragmatic knowledge. His respect for these methods and his willingness to adapt and evolve distinguished him from those explorers who underestimated the cold's capacity for destruction. As he matured, Amundsen's social world both expanded and contracted. He cultivated relationships with seafarers, naturalists, and fellow outdoorsmen, each providing insight and camaraderie. Yet, he retained an introverted, even solitary aspect, preferring the company of journals and maps to the distractions of bustling urban life. The isolation he sometimes sought mirrored the environments he would soon traverse, places where fortitude and self-reliance were paramount. During this period, tragedy and loss deepened his resolve. The death of his father and later his mother brought a sobering independence. Faced with the weight of familial responsibility and the prospect of choosing his future, Amundsen turned to his inner wellspring of determination. He took control of his destiny, discarding convention and embracing the risks inherent in his path. By his late teens, Amundsen had evolved into a figure marked by athletic prowess, meticulous preparation, and an almost monastic dedication to the cold. His ambitions turned toward concrete plans for exploration, beginning with local expeditions to Norway's vast coastline and interior wilderness. Each journey presented opportunities for learning about equipment failure, bodily limits, the dangers of overconfidence, and the value of humility before nature. His personal philosophy, shaped by these formative experiences, became predicated upon two principles: preparation is paramount, and survival is an art as much as a science. The discipline cultivated in youth was more than a tool for individual achievement. It became Amundsen's signature, the defining attribute that separated him from rivals and contemporaries. Thus, the boy who dreamed of ice became the youth born for cold, ready and willing to pursue the horizons that had stirred his heart since childhood. Through rigorous discipline and a relentless drive, Amundsen constructed the foundation not only for his historic journeys, but for a life that would inspire countless others to seek the edges of the possible, where human ingenuity clashes with the cruelty and beauty of nature. Chapter 3: Learning from the Sea, First Expeditions and Hard Lessons. Roald Amundsen's passage into young adulthood was marked by confrontation with the formidable forces of the sea. The Norwegian coast, a labyrinth of fjords and open waters, served as both school and adversary, shaping his emerging identity as an explorer. The lessons he gleaned in these trials transcended navigation, imparting wisdom essential for future polar expeditions. His first significant ventures were maritime journeys, often aboard small, sturdy vessels whose ability to withstand tempests mirrored the resilience required of their crew. These early expeditions challenged Amundsen's convictions about preparedness and endurance, offering real-time tests of both strategy and spirit. The North Sea, known for its capricious weather and shifting tides, quickly taught him the costs of underestimating nature. Amundsen's earliest command came in the form of assisting older, experienced sailors, absorbing the nuances of ship management, meteorological anticipation, and teamwork. He learned to read the sky and the water's surface, acquiring a sixth sense for impending storm or treacherous ice. Navigation, far from being a technical exercise, revealed itself as an art of adaptation, each journey presenting combinations of risk, opportunity, and revelation. The young Roald was relentless in his pursuit of excellence. He began to formalize his education in seamanship, seeking certifications and consuming literature on oceanography, meteorology, and naval engineering. These efforts were motivated not by academic ambition, but by the urgent necessity of survival. A mistake at sea often carried irreversible consequences, a truth reinforced by his witnessing disasters and narrow escapes involving friends and mentors. It was on these expeditions that Amundsen first encountered the imperative of teamwork. Crew morale, coordination, and clear communication could spell the difference between triumph and tragedy. He internalized the importance of mutual respect and the necessity of clear leadership, even as he often found himself at odds with older authorities over methods and strategies. In addition, these formative years exposed him to the fragility of human ambition. Harrowing storms, equipment failures, and ice-choked passages regularly threatened progress, yet each setback instilled lessons not only about the hazards of rashness, but also the virtues of patience and adaptation. Amundsen became adept at improvisation, learning to repair equipment with limited resources, modify plans in response to changing conditions, and maintain morale through adversity. His first ventures into Arctic waters were tentative yet illuminating. He joined small ship expeditions that skirted the boundaries of the polar region, serving as both observer and practitioner. Here, he witnessed firsthand the interplay between ice, wind, and human ingenuity. Encounters with indigenous populations broadened his understanding of adaptation and resilience, leading to a lifelong respect and receptivity to their teachings. These early experiences were not devoid of personal loss and hard lessons. He faced periods of hunger, illness, and near shipwreck. The emotional toll was significant, but these challenges carved deeper channels of fortitude within him. Rather than deterring his ambitions, they reinforced his belief in the transformative power of adversity. Amundsen's emerging philosophy was thus grounded in pragmatism, humility, and a perpetual readiness to learn. The sea, in its infinite unpredictability, became his primary mentor. Each wave crest, each icy wind, each starless night at anchor sharpened his self-awareness and resolved him to master the elements. Through careful preparation and uncompromising resolve. By the close of this stage, Amundsen was no longer a novice, but an adept navigator and strategist. The scars of these initial journeys, literal and metaphorical, became the foundation upon which his later triumphs would be built. The hard lessons of the sea created an explorer with deep respect for nature's power, a leader who would transform caution and preparation into the cornerstones of his polar ventures. Chapter 4. Inspired by Nansen, the Call of the Poles. In the late 19th century, the name Fridtjof Nansen echoed among Scandinavia's youth as the embodiment of Arctic heroism. For Roald Amundsen, Nansen was more than a distant idol. He was a lodestar, a living testament to the potential of human ingenuity when pitted against the extremities of nature. Nansen's legendary voyage aboard the Fram, his scientific rigor, and his philosophy of adaptation profoundly influenced Amundsen's trajectory. Amundsen first encountered Nansen through written accounts, expedition logs, scientific papers, and tales retold in Norwegian households. What struck the young explorer was not merely the magnitude of Nansen's achievements, but the methods underpinning them. Unlike those who had perished against Arctic forces, Nansen succeeded through meticulous preparation, openness to indigenous wisdom, and a willingness to innovate in method and equipment. The influence of Nansen was catalytic. Amundsen shifted his ambitions from general adventure to targeted exploration of the polar environments. He absorbed Nansen's strategies, identifying the fundamental importance of scientific inquiry, physical conditioning, and psychological resilience. Inspired, Amundsen began to envision expeditions not simply as conquest, but as opportunities to contribute to global understanding of the world's most mysterious regions. Personal contact with Nansen delivered further transformation. Amundsen sought mentorship, contacting and eventually meeting Nansen, whose advice was both direct and invaluable. Nansen encouraged rigorous training, the testing of equipment in the harshest conditions, and above all, the continuous acquisition of practical knowledge. This guidance reinforced Amundsen's devotion to preparation as the keystone of survival and achievement. Nansen's pioneering approach to clothing and diet, incorporating knowledge passed down by the Inuit, became a model for Amundsen's own experiments. He studied the use of animal-based garments, the packing of pemmican and fish, and the construction of sturdy yet portable sledges. The lessons he gleaned from Nansen's successes and failures became blueprints for his future endeavors, most notably his approach to the Northwest Passage and the South Pole. The call of the poles intensified with each passing year. Amundsen found himself drawn to the unresolved mysteries of the Arctic and Antarctic, entranced by the vastness, isolation, and the challenges they presented. He began to delineate his own plans, seeking routes avoided or failed by others, motivated by a hunger not simply for glory, but for knowledge and self-transformation. Nansen's impact extended beyond practical skills. It galvanized Amundsen's sense of purpose. He came to view polar exploration not as a solitary pursuit, but as a communal endeavor, reliant upon the exchange of wisdom and the integration of multidisciplinary approaches. The legacy of Nansen's scientific curiosity, commitment to collaboration, and respect for nature's methods were indelibly engraved upon Amundsen's character. In the light of Nansen's example, Amundsen prepared himself to take the next steps toward history's blank spaces. He formalized his education through scientific study, deepened his practice of physical endurance, and set about gathering the experience necessary to mount his own expeditions. The dream of reaching the poles, once an ethereal fantasy, gained substance and direction as Amundsen organized his first major journeys. Resolved to venture further and deeper than any before him, it was in the shadow of Nansen's achievements and illuminated by his mentorship that Amundsen became not merely an imitator but an innovator. The call of the poles, beckoning him toward ever greater acts of daring and discovery, set him upon a lifelong quest not only to reach the ends of the earth, but to expand the boundaries of human potential. Chapter 5: The Northwest Passage, Proving His Endurance. Roald Amundsen's first major feat as an explorer, the navigation of the Northwest Passage, represented a watershed moment in his career and in the annals of exploration. The passage, an elusive sea route through the Arctic archipelago of Canada, had claimed the lives and hopes of countless men before him. Its icy corridors, hidden obstacles, and relentless weather rendered it both a physical challenge and a symbol of human defiance against nature's barriers. In 1903, Amundsen launched his audacious attempt aboard the GGA, a small, stoutly built vessel staffed with a hand-picked crew seasoned in polar conditions. Unlike previous expeditions burdened by large contingents and ponderous equipment, Amundsen's approach was minimalist and pragmatic. Every item, every man, every plan scrutinized and selected for maximum efficiency and survival. The GGA advanced slowly through labyrinths of ice, each mile a contest between human will and the unpredictable Arctic. Amundsen's leadership came to the fore, orchestrating daily routines of vigilance, maintenance, and experimentation even as monotonous hardship threatened morale. He emphasized clear communication, teamwork, and faith in the plan qualities that knit his crew into a resilient unit. Success hinged upon adaptation, acknowledging the wisdom of Inuit communities encountered along the way. Amundsen leveraged their insights into clothing, hunting, and shelter. He supplemented his supplies with local food, improved his equipment based on first-hand advice, and absorbed lessons in travel that would prove invaluable. His respect for native knowledge was not superficial, it was fundamental and practical. Bridging traditions and innovation, the journey was marked by trials, bitter cold, isolation, and prolonged darkness. The passage demanded endurance not just physically, but spiritually. Amundsen meticulously recorded environmental data, charted previously unmapped regions, and documented survival techniques. These contributions extended the reach of scientific understanding and demonstrated the essential interplay between empirical research and direct experience. Wintering in the ice, Amundsen maintained discipline, organizing work, leisure, and education for his crew. He chronicled the psychological burdens of isolation and monotony, observing the necessity of mental engagement and camaraderie. These insights would later shape his strategies for subsequent polar expeditions, where morale was as important as rations. After nearly 3 years, in 1906, the GGA emerged triumphant from the western exit of the passage. Amundsen's achievement resonated globally, marking the first complete navigation of this legendary route. The expedition validated his principles: thorough preparation, respect for indigenous knowledge, lightweight planning, and endurance, more than a geographical milestone. The conquest of the Northwest Passage was a spiritual and physical proving ground. It displayed Amundsen's tenacity and adaptability, confirming his readiness for even greater challenges. The lessons in endurance, leadership, and innovation gained here would be marshaled in pursuit of the ultimate prize, the South Pole. Amundsen's reputation swelled. He was now recognized as a master of survival in the polar realms. The Northwest Passage, long considered unconquerable, had yielded not to sheer force but to preparation, humility, and science, these qualities, so painstakingly cultivated, set the stage for the defining expedition that would soon follow. Chapter 6, Master of Preparation, the Science of Survival. Few tales of expedition elevate the importance of preparation, as does Amundsen's quest for the South Pole. From the earliest murmurings of his dreams, Amundsen recognized that survival in Antarctica would not reward only the audacious but the methodical. Unlike many contemporaries who relied on intuition and tradition, Amundsen saw the success of polar exploration as a scientific enterprise, where every element, equipment, nutrition, manpower, animal welfare could and must be optimized, raised. Amidst Norway's seafaring heritage, Amundsen's formative years were steeped in the lore of northern explorers. He learned to respect the chilling embrace of polar night, and soon understood that the polar realm made no allowance for error. These lessons matured into a philosophy that endurance and ingenuity could win against even the fiercest cold. His approach began with relentless research. Before embarking for the southern continent, Amundsen immersed himself in the literature of Arctic survival. He corresponded with Inuit communities and seasoned explorers, learning the subtleties of clothing, food rationing, and shelter construction. Where most explorers braved the cold in woolen attire, Amundsen adopted animal skins mimicking indigenous survival strategies unearthed. From centuries of adaptation, dog sledging became another pillar of his preparation. Whereas many British explorers favored horses or mechanical sledges, Amundsen acquired 84 Greenland dogs, trained for the rigors of polar endurance. He studied their diets, temperaments, and sleeping habits, determined to minimize losses and maximize speed. Every harness, sledge, and boot was custom designed, tested for utility and efficiency. Nutrition was paramount. Amundsen calculated caloric requirements for men and dogs alike, stocking his supplies with pemmican and dense, fat-rich food with minimal perishability. He insisted on precise alterations to daily rations, monitoring the energy levels and overall health of his team as he would in a scientific study. Mistakes made in prior Arctic attempts, food spoilage, vitamin deficiencies, and dehydration were lessons he refused to repeat. One of Amundsen's defining traits was his insatiable curiosity about failure. He analyzed previous expeditions, scrutinizing why they faltered. Whether it was frostbite, scurvy, or psychological collapse, each setback revealed variables in need of control. The base at Framheim was constructed as both a home and a laboratory. Every snow block and airtight barrel a testament to preparation and learning. Training did not cease upon arrival. Amundsen's team practiced skiing, dog handling, and navigation daily, each man expected to master his duties under simulation of the harshest possible conditions. Physical robustness was paired with psychological resilience. Time was given to rest, plan, and acclimatize. In sum, Amundsen's approach to survival was founded on respect for the environment and the unknown, with science, adaptability, and efficiency as its instruments. By mastering preparation, Amundsen positioned himself and his team to not only survive the Antarctic, but to shape history within its icy embrace. Chapter 7, A Secret Decision, Turning Toward the South Pole. The journey that would make Amundsen the first to stand upon the South Pole was, in its inception, cloaked in secrecy. Originally, Amundsen had prepared his expedition for a conquest of the North Pole. It was this goal that secured funding, ships, and the confidence of his crew and sponsors. However, the announcement of Frederick Cook and later Robert Peary's claims to have reached the North Pole forced Amundsen to reconsider. The Northern Prize had seemingly been seized, and the public's interest was waning. Amundsen, ever adaptive, set his sights on a new, historic frontier, the South Pole. This change was executed with remarkable discretion, fearing the loss of financial support and international regard, not to mention the intricacies of logistics. Amundsen kept his intent hidden. Only a single confidant, his brother, was informed of the pivot. When the expedition's ship, the Fram, set sail, even the crew believed their destination to be the high Arctic. The decision was not impulsive, but measured. Amundsen had meticulously studied the southern continent, He pored over the incomplete geographical surveys, absorbing every fragment published by previous explorers, particularly those of Ernest Shackleton, whose own attempt had carried him within striking distance of the pole. Amundsen's preparation was thus not only scientific but deeply strategic, fueled by a calculus of opportunity and risk. The secrecy began to fray as the Fram reached Madeira, a resupply port off the coast of Africa. There, Amundsen revealed his plan to the crew. The news was met with a mix of surprise, apprehension, and silent awe. The promise of unprecedented achievement rallied most, though some harbored doubts about the venture's morality and wisdom. Yet Amundsen's leadership was unequivocal. His ability to inspire and command loyalty overcame initial reservations. Official dispatches were soon sent to the relevant authorities and rival expeditions. However, Amundsen's announcement came so late that Robert Falcon Scott, then preparing his own push to the South Pole, had already departed. Unaware of the emerging competition, the stage was thus set for one of history's most storied polar races. Amundsen's secret decision transformed the expedition's dynamics. Supplies had to be recalculated and repositioned, the team's psychological focus redirected. New scientific aims, meteorology, glaciology, and navigation in unfamiliar latitudes added layers of logistical complexity. The risks were compounded by moral and reputational hazards, as the world scrutinized the Norwegians for their ambitious pivot. Yet within this clandestine strategy lay Amundsen's genius. By avoiding premature exposure, he neutralized rivals who could have easily sabotaged or paralleled his route. The uncertainty allowed him to maintain flexibility, adapting to the unfolding conditions and obstacles that would confront both his team and those of his British adversaries. In the context of polar history, Amundsen's secret decision redefined the very nature of exploration. It was no longer only about valor and experience, but about timing, discretion, and strategic vision. The world would soon witness the consequences of that choice, as two of the era's greatest explorers prepared to etch their names onto the bleak, windswept emptiness at the bottom of the world. Chapter 8. Rivals in the Ice, Amundsen and Scott. Across the snowbound vastness of Antarctica, two men stood in tacit rivalry, their ambitions converging on the same elusive prize. Roald Amundsen and Robert Falcon Scott, though separated by nationality, temperament, and method, were linked indelibly through their pursuit of the South Pole. Amundsen, meticulous and pragmatic, approached the endeavor as a problem to be solved. Scott, nurtured within the traditions of British naval command, infused his campaign with the ethos of duty and scientific pursuit. While both men respected the rigors of the Antarctic, their respective approaches to its challenges diverged sharply. Scott's British Antarctic expedition, operating with grand frameworks and a large contingent, emphasized scientific research alongside the quest for the pole. His logistic chain was complex, involving ponies, motor sledges, and manhauling, all untested. In such environments, Scott's men wore military-inspired attire, relying heavily on their brute determination and a culture steeped in customary protocol. Amundsen's team, in contrast, was streamlined, small, and empirically trained. The Norwegian explorer placed supreme trust in dogs and skis. His equipment, clothing, and methods were borrowed from the century-old wisdom of Inuit survival, focusing on efficiency, speed, and economy of effort. The rivalry was not only technical but psychological. Scott's expedition, upon learning of Amundsen's new objective, felt the weight of national expectations and the pressure of unwelcome competition. Letters written from the base at Cape Evans reveal both admiration and anxiety as sense that the race had become existential. Amundsen, aware of Scott's preparations and methods, maintained a relentless pace of adaptation. He monitored the progress of the British party through radio reports and rare telegrams, recalculating his own tactics as needed. Every delay, every setback suffered by Scott, reinforced Amundsen's resolve to trust in his distinctive strategy. In the field, the contrast manifested in critical outcomes. Scott's motor sledges broke down early, rendering the use of ponies and man-hauling physically punishing and inefficient his only option. Amundsen's teams, equipped with optimized sledges in canine teams, moved rapidly across the ice, able to cover greater distances and reduce exposure to perilous weather. The interpersonal dynamics were equally poignant. Both men inspired fierce loyalty among their teams. However, while Amundsen's authority was rooted in mutual respect, pragmatism, and shared hardship, Scott's command was sometimes hindered by rigid hierarchy and the pressure to conform to Navy discipline. As the Polar March unfolded, the rivalry took on dimensions more profound than competition. Their choices, shaped by culture and character, resulted not merely in victory or defeat, but in the survival or death of men driven to their utmost limits. Ultimately, Amundsen's triumph and Scott's tragic loss would come to symbolize two contrasting approaches to exploration, a study in adaptation, leadership, and the essence of the human spirit against an unyielding frontier. Chapter 9, Building the Perfect Plan, Dogs, Skis, and Strategy. Success at the South Pole required more than courage. It demanded a synthesis of technology, physiology, and environmental mastery. Amundsen, in crafting his plan, built a framework so thorough that it bordered on obsession. Every aspect from transportation to route selection was calibrated to ensure the highest chance of survival and accomplishment. The backbone of Amundsen's strategy was the use of sled dogs and skis. While early explorers debated the merits of horses, man-hauling, or mechanical alternatives, Amundsen quickly recognized that dogs, native to polar climates, offered unparalleled mobility and endurance. Before departure, he sought expert guidance from Greenland and Siberia, learning the intricacies of canine care, team formation, and sledge design. The selection of dogs was meticulous. He opted for robust Greenland breeds, acclimatized to brutal cold and high workloads. The initial 84 dogs were trained not merely for pulling, but for obedience, stamina, and adaptability. Amundsen insisted on daily regimens, feeding, exercise, and handling to establish trust and resilience. He viewed each animal as a fellow expeditionary, integral to collective success. Skis were equally essential. Amundsen understood that traversing the Antarctic plateau demanded the reduction of friction and maximal efficiency. His team practiced skiing for months before departure, refining technique and learning to operate in tandem with their dog teams. This yielded a synergy of speed and control that would prove decisive in the polar push. Planning extended far beyond technology. Amundsen's logistical approach segmented the journey into manageable stages. Depots laden with food, fuel, and spare equipment were strategically placed along the route. Each cache was marked and mapped, creating a lifeline of sustenance that could be relied upon in emergencies. Every man was assigned precise roles: navigator, scribe, cook, dog handler, with clear protocols for rotation and support. Amundsen fostered versatility, expecting every individual to master skiing, navigation, and emergency survival. This all-hands ethos minimized risk and ensured that no single failure would doom the team. The weather was an omnipresent adversary. Amundsen devised contingency plans for storms, whiteouts, and sudden temperature drops. The team learned to erect shelters rapidly, conserve body heat, and ration supplies in anticipation of prolonged delays. Personal discipline was uncompromising. Clothing routines and sleep schedules were regulated with military exactitude. Psychology was another facet of the perfect plan. Amundsen recognized the danger of monotony and isolation, especially during long periods of inactivity at base or depot. He maintained morale through communal meals, shared responsibility, and periodic celebrations marking progress milestones. In every detail, from the angle of ski bindings to the caloric value of dog rations, Amundsen's plan embodied the principle that no variable, however minor, could be left to chance. His unyielding dedication to preparation transformed chaos into control, positioning his team for a historic march into the heart of the White Abyss. Chapter 10, The Base at Framheim, Waiting for the Right Moment. Framheim, isolated at the edge of the Ross ice shelf, became more than a base. It was a crucible of endurance and discipline. named after Amundsen's stalwart ship, the Fram, and the Norwegian word for home. Framheim symbolized both sanctuary and final outpost before the unknown. Construction began upon arrival, with Amundsen supervising every detail. The hut was built from prefabricated materials layered with insulated panels and snow blocks for thermal regulation. Its interior was a model of efficiency, bunks arranged for warmth, storerooms stocked with months of provisions, and workspaces dedicated to navigation, scientific observation, and sled maintenance. Life at Framheim was governed by routine. Mornings commenced with feeding the dog teams and maintaining equipment. Days were filled with drilling, planning, and scientific tasks. Amundsen insisted on perpetual readiness. Supplies were inventoried, repairs conducted with surgical precision, and every man trained in emergency protocols. Yet, beyond activity lay the challenge of patience. The expedition could not simply rush toward the pole success demanded, waiting for the opportune moment. Antarctic weather, notoriously capricious, would frequently confine the team to quarters for days or weeks. Amundsen maintained psychological resilience through community, storytelling, letters home, games, and shared meals fostered camaraderie. Scientific observation flourished. Instruments measured temperature, wind, and precipitation, allowing Amundsen to amass data for optimal timing. The team recorded detailed logs, mapping potential hazards and refining routes. Framheim became both a home and an outpost of learning, a place where waiting was transformed into preparation. As months passed, anticipation mounted. Amundsen's discipline remained absolute. Supplies were double-checked, dogs were exercised and protected from frostbite, and every member was reminded of their ultimate purpose. False starts, dictated by poor weather or technical setbacks, tested morale but proved the virtue of restraint. Patience, Amundsen believed, was as fundamental as courage. In the midst of desolate beauty, the men of Framheim honed themselves into instruments of exploration. Their resilience, forged by communal effort, was the final ingredient necessary for the assault on the pole. By waiting for the right moment, Amundsen ensured his team would march not merely with hopes, but with certainty. Chapter 11: False Starts and Deadly Mistakes. No exploration unfolds without adversity. The journey from Framheim to the South Pole was punctuated by setbacks, false starts, and, in some cases, mistakes that risked catastrophe. For Amundsen and his team, every error was met not with despair but with analysis and adaptation. Initial attempts to begin the march were thwarted by early season storms and biting cold. On several occasions, the team set out from Framheim only to be forced back by conditions more brutal than anticipated. Sledges broke, dogs suffered, and provisions were stretched to their limits. Each retreat, though mortifying, provided valuable data on weather patterns and logistical demands. Amundsen recognized the danger of overconfidence. He documented every failure, instructing the men to adjust routines, recalibrate supplies, and refine techniques. Sled modifications, improved packing, and optimized rations all emerged from the lessons of initial setbacks. Team members learned to recognize the symptoms of frostbite and fatigue, adjusting clothing and rest schedules accordingly. One recurring challenge was navigation. Whiteouts and drifting snow obscured landmarks, inducing disorientation even among experienced skiers. Amundsen introduced the use of fixed compasses and weather-beaten flags, enabling the group to maintain cohesion even in near blindness. Mistakes in route selection, choosing paths with hidden crevices or unstable ice, were catalogued and avoided in subsequent attempts. Canine management also evolved through error. Early missteps in feeding and team selection led to overwork and loss of several dogs. Rather than persist with ineffective routines, Amundsen monitored animal health, rotating teams, and varying diets to sustain stamina. The ethos of learning from adversity was extended to every facet of the expedition. Interpersonal tensions tested the expedition's unity. Prolonged confinement and repeated disappointments conjured moments of frustration and conflict. Amundsen, as leader, fostered open communication and adaptive problem-solving, Disputes were aired and resolved through shared understanding of common goals. Perhaps the gravest mistake was the underestimated exposures. On one occasion, a team member suffered severe frostbite, requiring emergency intervention. Amundsen's insistence on discipline: no one ventured outside without full gear. Rest periods were mandatory and checks were routine was intensified. Survival depended on collective vigilance. In this unforgiving theater, mistakes were inevitable. What set Amundsen's team apart was their rigorous use of failure as a tool for advancement. Every setback became the seed of improvement, emboldening the men to confront new hazards with ingenuity and resilience. By turning deadly errors into renewed strengths, Amundsen's expedition transformed uncertainty into the foundation of triumph. Chapter 12, The Final March into the White Silence. The long-awaited moment arrived. With supplies checked, spirits high, and the weather finally compliant, Amundsen and his select party commenced their final march toward the South Pole. What awaited them was not only distance, but a silence so profound and absolute that to journey through it required the deepest reserves of will. The landscape was otherworldly, endless plains of unbroken white, the horizon dissolving into a void of snow and cloud. Only the hiss of the wind and the rhythmic crunch of skis accompanied their progress. Amundsen's team moved in echelon, dogs harness taut, sledges brimming with carefully rationed provisions. Each day was a test of perseverance. Temperatures plunged to intolerable lows and every breath seemed to freeze in the lungs. Eyes frozen shut by spindrift, hands numbed despite layers of fur and leather. The sun, when visible, seemed an indifferent overseer, its glare ironically blinding in its reflection on the ice. Navigation was a challenge of science and intuition. Compasses, charts, and natural markers guided the route, but in the monotony of the plateau, landmarks became meaningless. Amundsen advanced through incremental progress, each kilometer measured and marked with silent determination. Psychological endurance was paramount. The white silence pressed upon the team, conjuring feelings of isolation. Solidarity was maintained through ritual morning coffee, communal meals, the shared work of tending to dogs and maintaining sledges. Amundsen insisted on routine, aware that rhythm was a bulwark against the numbing sameness of endless snow. Physical signs of exhaustion emerged. Muscles failed and injuries appeared, frostbite, sores, and the strain of relentless cold. Yet Amundsen's discipline in pacing, rest, and nutrition staved off the worst. Even the dogs shared the regimen. Those too weak were moved to less demanding tasks and, in extremity, sacrificed for the survival of the others. On the 14th of December 1911, after weeks of grueling march, the team reached the South Pole. Emotions mingled: elation, relief, awe, and a quiet sense of achievement. A tent was erected, the Norwegian flag unfurled, and a message left for Scott. Photo records captured the moment, but it was the silence itself that bore witness to their triumph. In the narrative of exploration, the final march into the white silence stands as a testament not to brute force, but to the orchestration of preparation, adaptability, and psychological strength. What Amundsen and his men achieved was more than a geographical milestone. It was the ultimate assertion of human possibility amid the majestic indifference of nature. Chapter 13. Across the frozen plateau, the Antarctic plateau stretches ceaselessly, a white desert, isolated from the world by unrelenting winds, crevices yawning beneath snowdrifts, and temperatures plunging to lethal lows. Crossing this frozen wilderness demanded not only exceptional courage, but a mastery of logistics, adaptation, and psychological resilience. For Roald Amundsen and his team, the passage across this alien realm embodied both the pinnacle of human endeavor and a test of every ounce of preparation he had meticulously crafted over years. In October 1911, Amundsen set out from Framheim, his shrewdly constructed winter base on the edge of the Ross ice shelf. Unlike his British counterparts, Amundsen's plans were forged in the crucible of experience, gleaned from Arctic voyages and lessons learned from the Inuit. His team Olav Bjaaland, Helmer Hansen, Sverre Hassel, and Oscar Wisting moved not as individual glory seekers, but as a coordinated unit disciplined in the art of survival. Each member wielded a specialized skill: navigation, dog driving, skiing, and supply management. Their very lives would depend on this collective expertise. Equipped with sledges pulled by hardy Greenland dogs, Amundsen's party left nothing to chance. Their clothing was inspired by Inuit furs, layered and functional. Protecting them from frostbite, they carried precisely measured rations, with caches established en route to serve as lifelines for the return. Their path, chosen for its relative safety rather than glory, skirted the impassable Beardmore Glacier and favored the relatively stable Axel-Heiberg Glacier. It was this meticulous attention to detail, not mere brute force, that would become the hallmark of Amundsen's success day after day. The team confronted the psychological monotony of the plateau, a terrain where sky and ground melded into, endless white, directionless and blinding. Navigation relied on celestial observations, steady compasses, and the almost instinctual sense of the lead skier. Temperatures often dropped below -40 C, threatening to sap vitality as quickly as a sudden storm. Yet, each stage of the journey was marked by ritualistic routines: feeding the dogs, checking equipment, and maintaining morale even as exhaustion gnawed at body and mind. One of Amundsen's great innovations lay in the management of his sled. Dogs embracing the harsh realities of polar travel. The weakest dogs were humanely culled and provided as sustenance for the others and for the men. A controversial but pragmatic decision born of survival necessity. Such choices speak not only to the physical toll, but also to the moral quandaries that shadowed their footsteps. As weeks passed, the plateau gave up none of its secrets easily. Sudden whiteouts could obscure even the most diligent navigation. At times, the sastrugi-ribbed snow threatened to shatter the runners of their sledges or bring them to a standstill. Frostbite, snow blindness, and the relentless threat of crevices haunted their progress. Each mile was earned at the cost of sheer endurance, ingenuity, and an unbreakable bond of trust within the team. Finally, after more than a month of relentless advance, the horizon shifted, the sun rose higher. Temperatures moderated just enough to allow great emotion, and the contours of the polar plateau began to reveal its descent toward the South Pole. Men, battered but unbroken, pushed forward towards their greatest destiny. The journey across the frozen plateau would come to stand as a defining moment in polar history, a testament to human perseverance, ingenuity, and the unyielding resolve of a leader who understood that in the heart of the most forbidding landscapes, survival depends on humility before nature and the collective discipline of a unified, adaptable team. It was not the grand gestures of heroism, but the daily triumphs over monotony and hardship that laid the pathway to the pole. Chapter 14, Victory at the Bottom of the World. December 14th, 1911, stands as one of the most significant milestones in the chronicle of exploration. On this day, Roald Amundsen and his weary yet resolute companions gazed upon a point devoid of any natural marker, the South Pole, the geographic bottom of the planet. The moment was both anticlimactic and profound, a culmination not only of months of hardship, but of decades of competition, ambition, and the inexorable drive to claim that last blank spot on the map. Upon reaching the pole, Amundsen's team was seized not by exuberant celebration but by a solemn gravity. The immensity of their achievement seemed to settle silently around them, as blank and unknowable as the Antarctic expanse itself. They planted the Norwegian flag, a bold declaration amidst the silent wastes. Photographs were taken, grim visages, documented for posterity, eyes squinting against the glare of a sun that never set. But the triumph was tempered by uncertainty. Amundsen, ever pragmatic and mindful of his rival Scott's concurrent expedition, understood that history was often written by those who returned to tell it. The priority thus shifted from celebration to documentation. Careful navigation readings were taken at multiple points over several days, precisely fixing their location and ensuring there could be no doubt or dispute about their primacy at the pole. Their tent, left as a marker, contained letters for Scott and the King of Norway, a statement of precedence, but also a gesture toward the code of honor among explorers. The psychological state of the team these days was complex, relief mixed, with a lingering anxiety about the journey home. Amundsen knew all too well that the frozen plateau was as lethal on the return as the approach. The margin between success and catastrophe remained vanishingly thin. Nevertheless, the men allowed themselves brief moments of reflection. They spoke of loved ones, contemplated the enormity of their conquest, and marveled at the thought that they were, even for a moment, the most southerly people on earth. Logistical routine did not falter. Supplies were carefully inventoried, dogs were rested and fed. None of Amundsen's meticulous habits was abandoned. Indeed, the discipline of survival intensified. The weather remained fickle, with shifting winds and temperature drops threatening their hard-won position. Every action at the pole was measured against the knowledge that no one would come to their rescue were disaster to strike. One of the striking characteristics of Amundsen's leadership at the pole was his ability to maintain focus. Amid the historic magnitude of the accomplishment, the ritual of daily life continued, cooking simple meals, maintaining gear, and rotating the watch. This conscious routine forged a psychological anchor in an environment that might easily have unmoored lesser men. Before departure, Amundsen's party erected small cairns to aid navigation. Should they be forced to retrace their steps, they left spare supplies and their now iconic tent with the hope that, should another party arrive, these artifacts might aid their survival. Such mementos echo through the polar narratives, a blend of rivalry, camaraderie, and a shared understanding of the extreme dangers involved. As Amundsen and his team began their journey back, the reality of what they had accomplished slowly settled in. The South Pole was no longer a geographic abstraction nor a goal on a map, but an experience imprinted upon them, etched in memory and soon to be recounted to a waiting world. They had achieved what so many had failed to grasp, and in doing so, had both ended an era of exploration and inaugurated a new epoch of scientific and national striving. In the polar regions, victory at the bottom of the world was thus a profound rupture, a triumph of human ingenuity and will, shadowed by the awareness that every summit achieved in the wilderness bore the possibility of tragedy on its return. Such is the paradox at the heart of all great explorations and of Amundsen's polar legend. Chapter 15, The Journey Back, Escaping Death for Amundsen's team. The return journey from the South Pole was not the denouement of their expedition, but its most perilous stage. History's annals are filled with explorers whose accomplishments were sealed not at the apogee of their quests, but in their often doomed efforts to return, a truth Amundsen deeply understood. As they left their camp at the pole, the combined strain of exertion, isolation, and delayed fear became pronounced. The men were physically depleted, their muscles atrophied by cold and malnutrition, their minds nagged by the latent anxiety that every mile traveled deeper into the plateau multiplied the possibilities for disaster. Veterinary care for the remaining dogs became a daily priority, for these loyal creatures remained crucial to their rate of progress and chances of survival. Navigation on the return became, if possible, even more critical. The monotony of the featureless white continued to be both disorienting and mentally draining. Having established cairns during the journey out, Amundsen's party sought to follow their existing tracks wherever possible. This was easier said than done. Drifting snow and shifting winds often obliterated visible routes, and subtle errors could result in fatal detours. Amundsen's discipline in redundancy, the use of multiple navigational techniques, from sextants to compass readings to observational notes, again demonstrated his methodical brilliance. The harsh environment took its unrelenting toll. Frostbite became a daily foe, particularly as supplies ran lower and the weakest dogs were culled or exhausted. The psychological state of the men oscillated between hope and despair. Each passing day without calamity forged a growing optimism, but every minor setback, a broken sledge runner, a lost supply cache, or a sudden storm could trigger intense stress. Perhaps the greatest challenge of the return was the crossing of the plateau's most treacherous sections. Crevasse fields posed mortal danger. Sometimes the lead skier would break through a snow bridge, narrowly escaping a fall into the frozen abyss below. Routines of caution became sacred. Every member was tethered, every load balanced with utmost care. Even so, close calls abounded, a reminder that in the Antarctic, the smallest mistakes might amplify into catastrophe. As the elevation dropped and the team neared the established supply depots, the collective relief became palpable. Calorie intake increased, restoring depleted reserves. The men grew more animated, their thoughts turning slowly from survival to the prospect of home. Yet, discipline never wavered. Amundsen's unforgiving regimen of checklists, rationing, and equipment maintenance persisted to the very margin of safety. By the time they approached Framheim, their journey had morphed into legend. The team was battered but alive. Their successful round trip across the plateau and to the pole an unprecedented feat. Amundsen noted the solemnity with which his men returned, not as conquering heroes, but as individuals chastened by the immense power of nature and the fragility of human ambition. Their survival was owed as much to collective discipline as to any one man's resolve, as much to adherence to routine as to the thrill of glory. In the mythology of exploration, the return is often the true crucible. Amundsen's escape from the jaws of Antarctica's deathly grip did not merely cement his place in history, but offered testament to the ethos that would become his signature: respect for nature, meticulous preparation, and the humility to adapt unceasingly to the implacable environment of the polar wastes. Chapter 16. News reaches the world, fame and controversy. The return of Amundsen's team to the fringes of civilization was the opening of a new, equally dramatic chapter in the polar saga. The announcement of their triumph, dispassionate in its delivery but explosive in its reverberations, echoed throughout scientific, journalistic, and political circles across the globe. Overnight, Amundsen was transformed from an obscure Norwegian explorer into a symbol of national and personal achievement. Dispatches were sent from Hobart, Tasmania, where Amundsen landed in March 1912. In a terse telegram to his brother and supporters, he declared, "Pole reached December 14, 1911. The world's media, primed by years of suspense and a close contest with Scott's British expedition, erupted at the unprecedented news. Celebrations erupted in Norway, where Amundsen was hailed as a national hero. The age of polar conquest seemed, at last, to have reached its zenith. Yet this acclaim was immediately enmeshed in controversy. Skepticism shadowed the announcement, as rival nations and scientific bodies rushed to confirm the veracity of Amundsen's claim. Could this relatively unknown Norwegian have triumphed where so many better financed and more heavily publicized expeditions had failed? The British press, in particular, withheld its stamp of approval, still hopeful that Scott might yet emerge as the true victor. Amundsen, wary of the politics of fame, presented his records with clinical thoroughness. Navigation logs, photographs, and documented coordinates were scrutinized by committees and rival explorers. Amundsen's reticence, a product of his introverted character and suspicion of public pageantry, was interpreted alternately as circumspection and arrogance. Yet it was his ironclad documentation and the testimony of his team that convinced even doubters of his accomplishment. The media frenzy was accompanied by a groundswell of nationalistic sentiment. Norway, only recently independent, seized Amundsen's triumph as a touchstone for national identity and pride. His image became ubiquitous on stamps, in school books, and at public celebrations. For Amundsen, the adulation proved a double-edged sword. It secured funding and recognition for further projects, but ensnared him in a web of expectation and public scrutiny that he found burdensome, if not distasteful. Controversy also dogged his handling of Scott's parallel expedition. When news arrived of Scott's death on the return from the pole, public sentiment swung dramatically. Amundsen was unjustly painted by some quarters as opportunistic, accused of secrecy and competitiveness that may have contributed to the British tragedy. These accusations, rarely rooted in fact, reflected the emotional investment nations had in the era's final geographical conquest. Amidst the tumult, Amundsen pressed forward with his scientific mission. He published detailed accounts, contributed navigational and meteorological data, and continued to plan future polar ventures. Yet, he remained perennially shadowed by the controversies of the polar man both celebrated and missunned. A stud, whose single-minded devotion to exploration was often at odds with the very society that now clamored for his presence. Amundsen's entry into the pantheon of world explorers was thus marked, not only by the magnitude of his achievement, but by the complexities of fame, suspicion, and the shifting winds of public opinion. The man who had mastered the art of survival at the world's end now found himself navigating equally treacherous social terrain, a fact that would define his career, even as his legend grew. Chapter 17, The Tragedy of Scott, A Shadow over Triumph. No sooner had Amundsen's victory begun to resound around the world than news arrived to cast a somber shadow over his achievement. Captain Robert Falcon Scott, once considered the likely favorite in the race to the South Pole, had perished along with his entire polar party on the return journey. The unfolding of Scott's tragedy and its intersection with Amundsen's triumph would become one of the most poignant and controversial episodes in the annals of exploration. While Amundsen was securing his credentials in Hobart, the British relief expeditions in Antarctica stumbled across Scott's final camp. There, they found the bodies of Scott, Edward Wilson, and Henry Bowers, their last supplies exhausted, their diaries and letters documenting the harrowing final days as the Antarctic winter closed in. The world was stunned. The British public, in particular, was swept by a wave of grief that soon gave way to a complicated search for meaning and, for someone to blame. The press in Britain lionized Scott and his companions, casting them as tragic heroes who battled with honor, dignity, and stoic resolve. Vigils and monuments sprang up across England. Yet the very public narrative that immortalized Scott also cast Amundsen in an ambivalent, sometimes adversarial, role. He was, after all, the living victor, and his careful secrecy regarding his intentions to reach the pole fearing intervention from Scott and others was now interpreted by some as ruthless, even unsporting. Of course, the truth was more nuanced. Amundsen had chosen his tactics from necessity, not malice. He had learned to adapt his plans with the pragmatic flexibility that the poles demanded. Contrastingly, Scott's expedition was marked by idealistic but flawed logistics, including reliance on ponies, unsuitable gear, and a disregard, some argued, for sound polar travel principles. Amundsen, while deeply sympathetic to the human cost of Scott's fate, could not escape the undertone of accusation that he had achieved victory at another's expense. In the years that followed, the Scott-Amundsen dichotomy became a lens through which nations projected ideals and insecurities. For the British, Scott symbolized heroic endurance and noble failure. For Norwegians, Amundsen embodied scientific planning, cool resolve, and success. The debate overshadowed Amundsen's own quiet grief. He had felt genuine sorrow for Scott, and placed no stock in triumph won through another's loss. Moreover, Scott's own writings revealed admiration for Amundsen's accomplishments, acknowledging the Norwegians' innovative use of dogs, clothing, and route selection. But in the public mind, complexity gave way to narrative, Scott as martyr, Amundsen as the hard-nosed mechanic of victory. The mythologies settled into national identity and historiography, shaping perceptions for generations. Ultimately, the tragedy of Scott magnified both the glory and the cost of polar exploration. Amundsen's achievement was indisputable, yet forever linked to an event he could neither foresee nor control. The South Pole, once a symbol of human aspiration, came to represent both the peaks and abyss of ambition. For Amundsen, this shadow was one he could never fully elude. He responded with dignity, focusing on his work and letting history draw its lessons. Yet as monuments rose to Scott across England, Amundsen pressed ahead, ever the restive soul seeking not vindication in fame, but the uncompromising freedom of the world's polar wastes. Chapter 18, Later Expeditions, the North and the Airships. While the world debated the meanings of his southern triumph, Roald Amundsen turned his gaze northward. The polar regions remained an unfinished canvas, and for Amundsen, the lure of the unknown was irrepressible. The interwar years would see him transform from the man who reached the South Pole first to a restless innovator, chasing new challenges in the Arctic, this time not only by sled and ski, but by air and sea. His early affinity for the North had been fostered decades before, but now, fresh from his Antarctic success, Amundsen sought to master what sea ice, shifting pack and freezing winds had long withheld from explorers the elusive Northwest Passage. In 1903 to 1906, before his South Pole triumph, Amundsen had become the first to navigate this fabled sea route, sailing the GGA with a tiny crew, wintering on King William Island and succeeding where generations had vanished. His method, as before, was one of learning from Arctic peoples, adapting Inuit clothing and sledges, and committing to the rhythms of ice, wind, and patience. After the Antarctic, Amundsen's ambitions only expanded. He set his sights on the North Pole, though news soon emerged that both Frederick Cook and Robert Peary had attained the prize. Their claims remained controversial. Undeterred, Amundsen pursued polar research and drift studies aboard the ship moored through the 1920s, braving pack ice, bitter cold, and the dangers of overwintering far from civilization. But perhaps his boldest ventures came by air. Amundsen recognized, earlier than most, that the future of polar exploration lay above the ice, not upon it. He embarked on a series of expeditions using flying boats and, most fatefully, airships. In 1926, alongside Italian engineer Umberto Nobile, Lincoln Ellsworth, and others, Amundsen piloted the airship Norge from Svalbard over the Arctic Ocean to Alaska. This monumental flight marked the first definite crossing of the North Pole by air, a feat greeted with global acclaim. The great airship drifted over endless fields of broken pack, silent and ethereal as a dream. These expeditions were not without hazard or controversy. Airship engineering was uncertain, navigation perilous, and rivalries between explorers and nations intense. Amundsen's working relationship with Nobile would later sour, becoming the subject of bitter dispute after the crash of the Italia in 1928. Yet, to the end, Amundsen's curiosity endured. He took risks, embraced new technologies, and collaborated with scientists and engineers, forever seeking vantage points from which to better understand the polar world. His expeditions yielded meteorological, geological, and oceanographic data that enriched scientific understanding and laid the groundwork for future polar aviation and research. Thus, the later years of Amundsen's life were marked not by rest, but by restless innovation. From kayak to airship, he spanned the world's frozen frontiers, finding in each expedition a new purpose and a new challenge to overcome. Chapter 19, The Final Mission, Disappearance in the Arctic. The relentless call of the North was both a source of inspiration and the setting of Amundsen's last chapter. In 1928, the explorer's deep sense of responsibility and camaraderie led him into his final, most enigmatic journey, a mission marked not by conquest, but by rescue, and ending in mystery. When news broke that Umberto Nobile's airship Italia had crashed upon the ice north of Svalbard, Amundsen responded immediately. Despite past disagreements, he was unwilling to abandon a fellow explorer to the fatal uncertainties of the Arctic. Leaving from Tromsø on June 18, 1928, Amundsen boarded a French Latham 47 seaplane, accompanied by a small crew, into weather as uncertain as the fate of those he sought. The plane was last sighted over the Barents Sea, then silence. No radio messages were received. No landing was observed. An international search found out across the northern seas, deploying ships, aircraft, and hope. Wreckage afloat, parts of oil tanks was found on the sea weeks later, but there was no trace of Amundsen or his companions. The man who had returned from every frozen horizon had finally vanished into the very environment he had so often mastered. Amundsen's disappearance was met with public shock and private grief. To many Norwegians, he was not simply a national hero, but a living symbol of courage, resilience, and methodical preparation. Memorials were held in Oslo Cathedral. Tributes poured in from all corners of the world. Yet something was fitting, almost mythic, like his vanishing. No grave, no epic account of final moments, just the Arctic, limitless and silent. Speculation abounded. Some wondered if he and his crew did not survive the crash, if they met death bravely on flotsam amid the frigid seas, or if they had perished almost instantly. But in the end, the uncertainty only deepened the aura around Amundsen's legend. In this final act, Amundsen's life came full circle: self-sacrifice, duty to those at risk, and an unwavering commitment to the polar frontier qualities that had defined his adventures. From first to last, to this day, the Arctic keeps its secrets. The legacy of his disappearance is a poignant reminder that the poles are not only places of triumph, but of mystery and ultimate humility. Chapter 20, Legacy of Ice, the greatest polar explorer. Amundsen's legacy is written not just on the maps or in the annals of exploration, but in the enduring spirit of human curiosity and resilience he embodied. He was a man of paradox, both intensely private and internationally renowned, pragmatic to the point of ruthlessness, yet deeply loyal to his companions, forever in pursuit of frontiers, yet grounded in scientific method and respect for local wisdom. The first to reach the South Pole and the first to navigate the Northwest Passage, Amundsen's achievements redefined what civilization believed possible. He took the lessons of the indigenous Arctic peoples and elevated them through innovation and discipline. He championed preparation over improvisation, teamwork over glory-seeking, and adaptation over stubbornness, a philosophy that would become the gold standard in polar and extreme environment expeditions. Beyond expeditionary feats, Amundsen's story altered the world's understanding of polar geography, meteorology, and oceanography. His detailed logs, meteorological data, and scientific collaboration enriched the understanding of both poles in an age before satellites or reliable long-range communication. He inspired generations of explorers, scientists, and dreamers to push beyond apparent limits, not merely for fame, but for the thrill of discovery and the advance of knowledge. Yet Amundsen's life is also a cautionary tale about the cost of ambition and the dangerous pull of uncharted horizons. The shadow of Scott, the controversies of fame, the risks of airships, and the mystery of his end, all these deepen the meaning of his legacy, infusing it with both awe and humility. Today, Amundsen's name adorns research stations, ships, and even craters on the moon. But perhaps his true memorial is found wherever the spirit of perseverance faces down the unknown. In the pulse of a sled dog team leaving tracks on new snow, the hum of an airship over polar ice, or the silent, endless horizon of the world's wildest places. Roald Amundsen won history's most dramatic race, but more than that, he exemplified the restless courage to venture where others only dreamed of going. The greatest lesson he bequeaths is not simply how to survive the ice, but to persist, adapt, and always seek the next horizon.